Thank you very much. Yeah, again,
Kira,
good morning and good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
A warm welcome
in the world
to another event of Asia Pacific Security Innovation Forum. Today's strategic forum discussion concentrates on the question how to balance support for Taiwan while neutralizing China's influence. It's of course a virtual event live streamed in the internet, and I am privileged to moderate today's discussion, and I'm particularly grateful for this opportunity. Let me express my respect to APSI's chair and patron, Professor Dr. Anita Abbott, and the entire team, without which we wouldn't have got so far. We have two distinguished guests today, Colonel John Black and Dr. Satoru Nagao, and I will introduce them a bit later. China and Taiwan. Today's subject matters. And it is not a local or a regional, but a truly global issue. And let me highlight some of the relevant aspects. And not to forget, it's not a static situation, but a very dynamic, even volatile one. Conditions might change quickly. China is intensifying its military, economic, and diplomatic coercion of Taiwan, which it considers a piece of lost territory that must be returned by force if necessary. What happens in the Taiwan Strait will bear on fundamental questions of international order and the future of democracy. A Chinese attack on Taiwan, regardless of its success, and whether the United States and partners choose to intervene, would trigger a global economic depression and shave trillions of dollars off global economic output. Taiwanese companies manufacture nearly 70% of the world's semiconductors and around 90% of the most advanced chips. If the world loses Taiwan's production capacity, no other company will be able to fill the gap in short term. But this is by far not the key problem. Taiwan matters because its fate is key for the future of the region and for the globe. And let me explain this briefly. America is roughly 20% of global GDP, and economic productivity is the root of power in the modern world. So this means that only a very great state could hope to become so strong as to menace the US and its allies. And the only state today that matches up to that description is China. But China on its own is not strong enough. It too is roughly 20% of global GDP. So how could China pose such a threat to our interests? By dominating Asia. Asia is now again the center of the world, upwards to 50% of the global GDP going forward. If Beijing could dominate Asia, it would be in a very strong position to dominate the world and us. Now, is China actually going to pursue this goal? The answer seems fairly clearly to be yes. If China becomes dominant in such a way over Asia, it will have a controlling influence over roughly half of the global economy. With this power, it will undoubtedly ensure that it is the center and effectively the director of the global economy. To those who accept such a China, following its rules and towing its diplomatic line, there will be rewards. But for those who resist, there will be penalties, exclusion from access, tariffs, and sanctions. We'd all be compelled to dance to Beijing's tune. This is why we talk about the great power competition. The means that China will need to use to achieve its ascendancy over Asia are military. And Taiwan occupies a central position along Beijing's path to this goal. Taiwan is the first step on the way to PRC's and CCP's regional and later global hegemony. Beijing is embarking on an historic military build-up of its conventional and nuclear forces. This is clearly a military build-up designed not only to resolve the Taiwan issue, but to project power throughout the region and ultimately the globe. I believe they are actively preparing for war. In this context, our common goal should be to prevent China from dominating Asia without a war. This is the optimal aim, a decent peace without war. But the only prudent way to achieve that goal is to be prepared to fight in a way that shows Beijing it just will not gain if it starts a conflict. You may call it a porcupine strategy. This is a cliche. If you want peace, prepare for war. The key to achieving this goal of blocking China from dominating Asia is a coalition. Fortunately, there are many countries in Asia that have the will and the way to help stand up to China, like India, Japan, Australia, and Taiwan itself. The key, though, is to make sure this coalition works. And this is why deterrence, cohesion, and credibility are the only reliable answers to the current and foreseeable challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, you see the broad spectrum of possible consequences if PRC continues to follow this aggressive, dominance-oriented approach. And luckily, we have two distinguished experts with us, and I will briefly introduce them. And let me start with Colonel retired John Black, who had served more than 25 years in the United States Marine Corps. Numerous positions throughout the world, including overseas operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. His military experience covers numerous activities and responsibilities. And let me point out just two or three. He was the one who mediated the US-New Zealand negotiations to reconcile policy disparities between New Zealand's nuclear-free legislation and the US's neither confirm nor deny policy, enabling the first US Navy ship visit to New Zealand in 33 years. He has been the one who accomplished a comprehensive turnaround in an 800-person unit, elevating the US Marine Corps' worst-rated unit, sorry to say that, into DoD's top-rated emergency service unit. What an impressive success. And he was acting as a regimental commander, 3,400 people across 17 countries in the Asia-Pacific region. So he has a broad experience in the Indo-Pacific. Today, he is responsible Chief Executive Officer of the GSD Group Consulting Services. He is the Chief Growth Officer and Consultant Blue Dragon IPS. IPS stands for Integrated Problem Solving, so a comprehensive approach. He is the one who was able to lead a 20% increase in consulting services expansion into the DoD, and he facilitated Blue Dragon activities, training for 20 defense nuclear facilities of the US throughout various regions. So Colonel retired John Black is a true expert, and I'm particularly grateful to have you with us, John. Thanks for joining. Dr. Satoru Nagao is a fellow non-resident at Hudson Institute based in Tokyo. From December 17 through November 20, he was a visiting fellow at Hudson Institute based in Washington, D.C. His primary research area is, and this is pretty interesting, US-Japan-India Security Cooperation. And he was awarded his FIDI by Gakushin University for his thesis, India's Military Strategy, the first such research thesis in this topic in Japan. And by the way, the Gakushin University is a premier institution from which members also of the Japanese imperial family have also graduated. Dr. Nagao holds numerous other research positions, including director at the International Security Industry Council. He is senior research fellow at the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies. He is lecturer at the Gakushin University, senior fellow at the Institute of National Security Studies in Sri Lanka, and senior research fellow at the Indian Military Review, and numerous other positions I cannot put forward here entirely. He's also visiting fellow at the Observer Research Foundation in India, and he has authored numerous books and articles on security issues, and he also contributes to the column Age of Japan-India Alliance at Nikkei Business, the journal of one of Japan's leading newspapers. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Satoru Nagao. We are very privileged to have you here today. Thank you again. We truly appreciate that. And I'm convinced that we will enjoy a meaningful and a rich discussion. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor first to Colonel John Black. John, may I ask you to start? And the floor is yours, please.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute honor to be here with all of you. You know, just like you mentioned, you know, I was able to serve in the military a long time, and I was able to deploy to 29 countries. And one of the things that I really appreciate about that experience is living with people from different cultures expands your brain, and it gives you ideas and allows you to approach things from a different perspective. You know, so when I take a look at this situation, there's about 5 or 6 different flashpoints throughout the Indo-Asia Pacific. This is one of those flashpoints. Of those flashpoints, you mentioned something really good, and that's out of all the nations around the world, really there's only one nation that has the ability to absolutely change the global order, and that's the People's Republic of China. You know, so I'll just say China instead of having to say the PRC the whole time. So with that understanding, as we take a look at what's going on in the Indo-Asia Pacific region, and we look at those different flashpoints and focus just on Taiwan, it can get complicated and complex really quickly, especially if you start going back into history several thousands of years. You know, so with that, I just want to acknowledge one, you know, we're going to be talking about things that are actually very, very complex, but also with the understanding that I really think it's really critical that when we're thinking about this, you know, we need to take a systems thinking approach and a holistic approach so that we can understand everybody's different interest depending upon what nation they're from, what positions they have, whether or not they're academics, policymakers, or practitioners, just so we can understand those nuances, because there's a lot of differences within there. You also mentioned the importance of looking at the various elements of national security, and that's your diplomacy, your information, your military, your economics, your law enforcement, intelligence. All those things are critically important. You know, so if I was going to take all of that and take a step back and say, why Taiwan? Why is Taiwan so important, or why does it matter? You know, I would say I'm going to try to limit my scope just from a U.S. perspective. You know, it's really important from a strategic interest point of view, from an American perspective, for several reasons. You know, first and foremost, we absolutely, when I say we, the United States, from a policy perspective, is regional stability is absolutely vital. You know, and this is really interesting because when we take a look at the security architecture throughout the Indo-Asia Pacific, we have 5 mutual defense treaties, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Thailand, Australia, and we also have strategic partners. For all of us, I would argue Taiwan's fate will directly impact the free and open Indo-Asia Pacific. If we can maintain the status quo, we can maintain the peace, keep prosperity, security, and stability. If we can't, if some other nation attempts to forcibly unify or take over Taiwan, it will critically ripple throughout the region and cause a lot of trouble. So, point 1, regional stability is critically important. That's the first thing why Taiwan is critically important. The second reason, you also mentioned it, economic security. I was taking a look at the Wall Street Journal the other day, and they mentioned that if there was a conflict in Taiwan, the minimum level of economic impact would be $5 trillion loss across the global economy. That's the low scale. How many decades is it going to take for the globe to recover from something like that? We don't know the answer. So it's critically important from the economic perspective, as well as from a technological perspective with the semiconductors, semiconductor chips. And then last but not least, the third point why I think it's critically important for us to support Taiwan wherever we can is because it's a democracy. And it's actually an amazing democracy, a wonderful place to visit, has an exceptional human rights record, and it's also very positive in support of climate change efforts and initiatives. So with those 3 things, regional stability, economic security, and democracy and human rights, those are the 3 things that I would prioritize for it. Besides that, I've been to Taiwan multiple times. I've hosted Taiwanese delegations. I visited there. My family loves it. I absolutely encourage people to go there and meet the people. Go there, meet people, see what they say. You'll find that they are amazing. Over to you.
Thank you so much. So this is pretty impressive, but without further ado, I would pass the floor to Dr. Satoru Nagao. Please feel free to put forward your first ideas.
Thank you very much. It is honor for me. Yes, Taiwan is strategic place, strategically important. So I want to analyze how strategic in this case, especially military aspect. In this case, we need 2 viewpoints. The China side, US Japan side, both. And in this case, we want to devise 2 topics. For China's defense or for China's offense, how important, how strategic. So, firstly, for China's defense, China believe what kind of logic they have. We need to analyze enemy's logic in this case, so that's why I try to analyze. In this case, China's development rely on the development of the cities in the coastal line. So that's why they want to protect this city. And they will try to create freedom of communication from the city, or in this case, including energy import from Middle East to the coastal city is very important and vital. Water resources came from Tibet to the cities is also important. So along with this line, China tried to start infrastructure project and one kind of 21st century version of the colonialism. They want to take this infrastructure from these local countries. All of these are very important problem, but which area is core interest of China? We need to identify which is coastal cities, I want to say. So to defend the coastal cities, where is the threat? Of course, in front of the coastal city is threat, including Taiwan. For example, if enemy set up the missile to attack the coastal cities, East China Sea there is no island except the Senkaku Island of Japan, or South China Sea, yes, few islands, but not a military base currently. Of course, China tried to build artificial islands themselves, so it will be the missile base, but this is China's base. So China tried to defend coastal city. That's why China tried to expand their influence and push all of the military outside of this area from the East China Sea, Taiwan, and the South China Sea. That's the defense side of the China's logic. But if so, view from the US and Japan how important Taiwan is. If China try to expand their influence to the world because of their own logic, we need to stop China. In this case, Taiwan is the key. Because if we keep the Taiwan as our side, we are located just in front of China's core interest. That is a very important card. That's why, view from the defense logic of China, Taiwan is very important. That is the first thing I would say. Second thing is, if view from China's offense, more bad thing, very important in this case. In this case, I need to analysis logic. If China occupy Taiwan, they can expand, they can deploy their military asset far from China. Because Taiwan is very important block wall in front of the Chinese coastal line. If China goes through this, through the East China Sea, go to the Pacific, through the South China Sea, go to South Pacific, Indian Ocean, other region, freely. Because Taiwan is very strategic to stop this move. So that's why China want to take Taiwan as a military base to expand their activities. That is a location. And view from the US and Japan, it is not acceptable. So that's why Taiwan is strategic. We must defend Taiwan. That is the most vital interest of our security. And China's security too. That is important. That's the strategic the meaning of this, I think.
Dr. Satoru, this is particularly interesting, and thank you for your view. The first ideas, we will have so quite some time to discuss this. Well, let's get one step back. If China believes that Taiwan is an integral part of their realm, then let's have a brief look at the Taiwanese population, what they think. Because everybody talks about Taiwan, so let's start to try a little bit to talk with them or understand better what they believe to do. And when I prepared this session, I tried to understand a little bit more in detail what is the feeling of the Taiwanese population concerning unification, if allow me to use this word from a German perspective. It was stunning, the result, because the vast majority rejects the idea of unification by numerous reasons. And I wanted to put forward a couple of arguments. They are bearing in their mind and in their heart. They say, well, the Taiwanese population, that there is only a very, very limited common history between China mainland and the island of Taiwan. Throughout the centuries, there has not been a very deep and a very profound integration of the island's population into mainland's population. So this is one thing. We do not share common history, and there are no historical or very few historical reasons to believe that we are one entity. One thing. Second, and you mentioned it earlier, you both, Taiwan adheres to liberal democratic principles of governance, and the inhabitants refuse to accept that the PRC upholds or practices exactly these principles and values. So they do simply not believe that their way of freedom democracy, liberty will be accepted in the mainland. And of course, we know the mainland PRC and the CCP's regime is an autocratic one. This has nothing to do with democracy as we understand it. And the third explanation I found out is that the population has a commitment problem, and they do simply not trust whatever Beijing is proposing or explaining. They do not believe that PRC and CCP will honor the promises if Taiwan's government and Taiwan's population agrees to unify. And they take as an example the fate of Hong Kong, just as a tiny example, what happened there. So a third point is they simply do not believe that they stand to their words. So this is what I found out, and I would be interested if you, with your experience of Taiwan, of the island, of the population, of the region, of the entire area over there, if you share these views, or if I got trapped by some misinformation, and how do you think we can proceed, and how can we envisage, let's say, a future without going to war? Please, John, probably.
Yeah, this is really great. And I know the studies that you're referencing, like there's really high numbers, like, 79% and above percentage of the population agrees as, Taiwan's, not necessarily mainland Chinese. So that was really critical. I'm taking a look over here, and one point that I like to make here, because I think part of this is like a information or a cognitive evolution. I like to point out that the fact that Taiwan has not always been Chinese. Before the mainland Chinese went to Taiwan, there were actually indigenous Taiwanese people on the island. So let's give some credit where credit's due, and the people were there before mainland China went down there with the Mings in the 1662 and the Qing loyalists in 1683. And there's also been periods when they weren't in control, such as after 1895, when Japan had control there. So we should really focus on hearing the voice of the people, and obviously coming from a Western perspective or an American perspective, people's voices are important. But I think this does go back to what you mentioned. That's a core interest. So you'll find that different countries have different core interests. So the PRC says their core interest is territory, and that's fine. That's their perspective. We just disagree with that. We disagree because we actually believe that democratic nations are good. We believe that people should have the ability and the right to vote, to self-determine how they want to be governed. And that's how I kind of sit on that situation. Over to you, Doctor.
You're on mute, Doctor. Yeah, no.
Okay, I understand. Yes, in my opinion, but in this case, we can remember the what happened in Hong Kong or what happened in the Xinjiang Uyghur. Or how many people want to live in China, or how many people want to live in the United States? Big difference, big difference. People want to live in the United States, but people do not want to live in China. Why? Why? Because people know what happened in Hong Kong, what happened in Xinjiang Uyghur. In the Hong Kong, democracy is violated. People's will is democracy, but Chinese government policy is not. What happens in Xinjiang Uyghur? If someone who resists the Chinese government, they need to go a re-education something facility. That is a very dangerous place for their life. So that's why if China wins the competition against the United States, it will be nightmare. Taiwan people know that because real example is ongoing in Hong Kong and Xinjiang Uyghur. In Tibet or Inner Mongolia, There are many examples. Recent Belt and Road Initiative infrastructure is also the good example. Their support is not for the local people. This is only for China. That's why high interest rates, and they take the right to control the infrastructure they build. This is not for local people. And why they say the 99 years they took the right to control the infrastructure, because the pronunciation of the 99 years is the same pronunciation of the forever in Chinese. When they lost the control on the Hong Kong, that was 99 years. So people do not want to live under the Chinese government rule. And Taiwan people know very much. And the Taiwanese people's opinion, we share the same opinion indeed. That's why Taiwan and China is completely different. That's my opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. John, please, feel free.
Yeah, so I just want to add one thing in there too. So I think I just wanted to throw in there just because I think it's really important for people to understand that this is really complex when you start looking at it from a policy perspective. And although I'm speaking from like a personal perspective, at the same time, I'm also factoring in the fact that, there's this term that you'll hear thrown out there, one China policy. What's funny is, when you hear one China policy, just about everybody has different perspectives and opinions with what that is. So like when I'm talking, I'm thinking of, hey, look, from a U.S. policy perspective, we base our relationship with Taiwan on the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, and then the 6 assurances. Simultaneously, we consult with our allies. And because our allies are critically important to us, and we will succeed or fail together. Should the respect and needs of the Taiwanese people not be met, where they want to self-determine, where and if somebody tried to forcibly take that away from them, that would not be good in the interest of the United States and its allies and its strategic partners. It would be very, very harmful diplomatically, informationally, militarily, economically. So I think that's why you're starting to see a lot of nations coming together talking about this critically important matter, because we want to maintain peace, prosperity, security, and stability. And we want to deter and avert war. Because we would prefer not to go to war. However, when national interests are threatened, some things are worth fighting for. Now that's my point.
Yeah, thank you for that. Let me just jump on that. I still believe that too many, let's say, responsibles in the world do not yet really understand Beijing's intentions, or they do not take them seriously enough. I think if we take the announcements, the speeches of the key leader of the CCP and PRC, including Xi Jinping, we must understand that the CCP and PRC wish to dominate. They truly wish to dominate the world after what they call 100 years of humiliation. And this is something to take extremely seriously, from my feeling. And the problem we are faced with, that we need to find a balance between financial interests, because China has been and still is a huge market for the economy and for financial issues. So either on one side, financial interests, and let me express it like it is, economic greed And on the other side, to recognize that there is an autocratic system, to recognize there are 28 million people on an island who wish to continue with democracy, freedom, liberty, and our way of life, and respecting and following our values. And that means that we have to find a balance. If we take a company, a huge company, a worldwide company like Volkswagen, producing numerous cars, vehicles in China, and being very, very dependent on the Chinese market, then for sure, from their perspective, they are not interested in having tensions between us and them. They want to have free access to the market. But that could mean, as I said earlier, that one day they have to follow Beijing's rules, and then they will keep their rewards, and otherwise they will receive penalties. So it is difficult to find these balances, but we need to express this clearly. I'm particularly interested in your views on that. Please feel free to join this idea, or to say, well, there are other things more important. Okay, please. But maybe Dr. Satoru, you start this time first.
Thank you very much. So in this case, what China is thinking is rely on the one feature of the China's strategic view. They do not trust anyone else. They do not trust anyone. Why I can say so? Because there is a similarity in the China's security-related idea and China's infrastructure project. I have already mentioned analysis, the core interest of China, such as the coastal line or defense and offense side, maybe I said. But in this case, we should not forget. If China try to defend themselves, why they need to push the other military outside from just East China Sea, the Taiwan, the South China Sea, because they do not trust any military around them. When we count the number of allies, in this case, formal treaty-based allies, how many Chinese allies they have? In each treaty-based ally, only North Korea. Why? Because China hasn't trusted any other military in the world. Compare with this, United States, how many allies they have? 53. In 31 in the NATO, Russia, in the Indo-Pacific, South America, we can count a total of 53. Because US is popular and China is not. Because US trusts allies and allies trust United States. But in case of China, China trusts only North Korea just side of Beijing, but not trust any other. Recently, China support Russia, but even if Russia in the history, they do not want to sign the treaty. So that's why this tendency, this feature is affecting their strategy. Infrastructure project is same. The Belt and Road Initiative, they invest a lot, but they try to take the money back. Despite this is support. From the humanitarian support, they should extend the deadline to return, but they increase their interest rate is 6 to 8%, despite other projects of the World Bank or Asia Development Bank, 0.25 to 3%. So China's interest rate is double. That's why debt is increasing in the recipient. And China builds this infrastructure along with the strategic lines, CRM communication or other alternative lines in the Indian Ocean region, so other places. So that's why this is infrastructure project only for China, not for locals. So from this, they do not trust any French allies of them. That's why China is alone. That's why China's voice is not penetrate to our mind. They fail to persuade other countries because they do not respect the interests of other countries. That is a big problem and core problem in China, I think. That's why we cannot identify what China want to do because they fail to achieve the goal because they try to push their interest to other country and other country defend their opinion because China do not respect our interest. That's what happened, I believe. Thank you very much.
Now, those are really great comments. Like one of the themes that I hear underneath all of that is just how does each country be a responsible stakeholder on the global stage and in the regional stage? So there's a divergence of some countries' core interest. So we definitely need to communicate those differences very clearly. And one of the differences is how different countries view Taiwan, because I know the PRC views Taiwan as a domestic matter, whereas the United States and Japan don't view it as PRC domestic matter. We view it as an international matter. One thing that I've seen, it's not written down in any books anywhere, but when I was taking a look at what has happened since 1979, you've really seen three things that the PRC has done. And one of the first thing was I think they've done a really good job trying to isolate Taiwan because they view it as a domestic matter. Two, I think they've tried to prevent the resurgence of Japan and India and other countries, but especially Japan in the Indo-Pacific region and on the global stage. And then they're trying to set conditions so that they can expel the United States military from the region, at least beyond the first island chain, because they think that if they can do that, they can achieve diplomatic, information, military victories, and then use their economic leverage to force everybody to bend to their will. When I take a look at some of the perspectives, one of the things that I've seen is there is a difference in perspectives, at least within the United States community, when you talk with academics and when you talk with policymakers and practitioners. I think a lot of times, most of the best academics that we have over here, they'll say, hey, look, there's definitely a threat based upon all the data and evidence that we have, but we don't have any clear indicators and indications that they're clearly going to attack Taiwan. But really starting in 2012, after you started to see the development of Xi Jinping thought, he's really started to hint at, hey, look, if we need to, we're going to forcibly reunify with Taiwan. And that forcible unification, that's a red trigger line within the various policies that we have. And I think that's why, like within the U.S. policymakers and practitioners, they'll say, hey, look, the threat is there based upon the data and the evidence, and the verbal words that we're hearing from Xi Jinping thought, it's a clear and present danger. But then the academics will say, hey, look, that's just a speech. That's not a true indicator. So it's a difference of opinion. But I would definitely say from the practitioner level, we're preparing for the worst case, because you have to prepare for war if you want to maintain the peace. And how do you do that? You have to make sure that other countries understand, hey, look, you can do whatever you want. If it's in your best interest, by all means, go for it. Just know that even though it's in your interest, doesn't mean it's in our interest and our friends. And that's where it's critical, because if you're acting as a single nation, you can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. But if you can work with a bunch of like-minded nations who have mutual interest, who want to maintain peace, prosperity, security, and stability, we can absolutely maintain a relative advantage of power, diplomatic, information, military, economic, to deter war. And if we do, unfortunately, have to go to war, then we just drag that big animal in the ocean and we hold it down until it submits. And hopefully that won't happen, but you have to be willing to go there.
Very interesting, John. Very interesting, Dr. Satoru. Thank you very much for that. Let me jump on that. It is really of importance. John, you mentioned earlier that the United States has 5 security agreements or treaties.
That's only in Asia. Only in Asia.
Only
we have more.
Yes,
we go to NATO, we go to South America.
Please apologize. But these 5, let me jump on them. So they are bilateral treaties and agreements. Would it be wise and doable to create kind of a network, of a security agreement network, probably similar to that of NATO in the North Atlantic and the European area, to prevent China from believing that they can use a salami slice tactics to cut one and then the second and then the third treaty, but to be confronted, allow me this expression, with a strong network of agreements where, for example, the United States, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and others have a very, very close link to each other, and not only directed towards Washington, D.C. One point we could talk about. Second point, in practical terms, again, we need to reduce our dependencies on China. We need to do this now. And these dependencies cover economic and financial dimensions. And we need to demonstrate clearly that we do not respect this, let's say, autocratic and dominance-oriented approach towards Taiwan by using, for example, the Taiwan Strait for freedom of navigation operations. So a couple of different things, I know, and they might not match, but I wanted to put them into the, to throw them into the discussion for further comments, please.
Oh, that's great. You know, I know, like, really for the past 10 years, there's been a lot of people, you know, across the U.S. and U.S. ally and partner space talk about this idea of, you know, hey, should we try to evolve the alliances or mutual defense agreements into something NATO-like? You know, and what was really interesting traveling around to a lot of the countries, there wasn't full buy-in for that. There was actually pushback just because how difficult it is to create a treaty and modify a treaty and get buy-in from the treaty, especially for the politicians who are in power at the time. You know, so what you've seen, despite that, you've seen a patchwork and a quilt work of countries come together. And, you know, you will have seen the U.S., Japan, Australia, trilateral service agreements and other stuff. You will have seen the Quad, where, you know, the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India are working together, but there's nothing formal like NATO. We were exploring, you know, how can we work with ASEAN, or how can we work with the different meetings, the ADMM plus, to get more teeth. Not quite there. Don't know if it's ever going to go there. You know, but the one thing we do know is that like-minded countries have to work together to protect their mutual interest.
Dr. Satoru, you would be one of, let's say, the potential members of such a network. Is that imaginable for you, or is it beyond reason?
Simply, I love the idea of Asia's NATO. That's true. But at the same time, indeed, it is very difficult to achieve because maybe Mercator map is not good information in this case, because when we see the real size, if we include the sea between the islands, Indonesian size is EU size. So similar size. And when we see the history, the royal family in the European countries married each other, or the nobilities also exchanged and connected each other. So that's why European can make the EU, but ASEAN cannot make similar one. So that's why despite I love the idea of the ASEAN NATO, we need something core interest. We need to identify core interest of the ASEAN NATO. When we see China's expansion, there is a feature. What happened in the South China Sea is a good example. When France withdrew, they took the half of the Paracel Island. When the US withdrew from after the Vietnam War, China took another half of the Paracel Island. When Soviet reduced the number of the troops in Vietnam, China took Spratly Island, only six feature, but the Spratly Island. And when the US troops withdrew from Philippines, China took Mischief Reef. So when the military balance has changed and there is a power vacuum, China took it. View from this, how to maintain military balance is the core interest of the ASEAN NATO or ASEAN network. In this case, even if this is not a real ASEAN NATO, if we can make the similar situation, more soft-based, but more similar situation if we create, in this case, it will work to maintain military balance. That's why Japan focusing on India, which other side of China. That's why Japan focusing on Southeast Asia, because another side, another front for China. So India, Southeast Asia, Taiwan, South Korea, or Japan, all of these countries, of course, the backside, Australia is there, and of course, United States is everywhere. So Indo-Pacific Cooperation divide China's military asset or budget multi-fronts. To maintain military balance, this is best situation. So even if India want to maintain the non-military or all military something non-alignment or all alignment, such kind of policy, even if such kind of policies, if China believe India is ally of Japan, in this case China need to share some certain budget and asset against India. That's why they cannot use the same asset against Japan or against the Pacific side. So it will work. So this is new, a little soft but Asian nature. So that is possible to achieve, I believe, and that I support this idea. Thank you very much.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. So we talked about ideas to deter or to deny PRC. Now, probably a minute or two or three, how can we support Taiwan a bit more? And I would like to remind all of us to Nancy Pelosi's visit not too long ago, and the reaction in Beijing. Well, Beijing was up in arms and followed by sound military exercises, incursions of airspace and naval territory and all that. Is it wise to continue with these kind of visits, which demonstrate clearly, of course, the willingness to support Taiwan, but which are, let's say, seen in very, very aggressive and very controversial on the PRC side? Is it useful from your point of view to conduct more visits like that from other nations as well, not only members of parliament, but also prominent members of the government? Do you think that we should continue or even intensify freedom of naval operations, as Germany does now, sending 2 military vessels to this area and demonstrating clearly that they wish to participate in the policy of the United States and other allies? Do you believe that we should try to show more muscles, or should we try to avoid that? Is it more appeasement strategy we should follow, or should we follow a more, let's say, tough positioning? This is a critical question, a sensitive question, I know that, but I should very much appreciate to get one or two ideas concerning that. John, please.
Yeah, I think for me, the most important thing is just to be very clear up front, because different countries are going to have different interests, and those interests are going to result in some disagreements. Taiwan is one of those areas where we just fundamentally disagree with the PRC. The PRC believes it's a domestic matter. We do not believe that. We believe it's an international matter. So what are some of the ways that we could do? So I would argue that without the Taiwan Relations Act and without all the military support, I would argue that Taiwan might not cease to exist. So what does that mean? We need to continue arming Taiwan so that it has the ability to defend itself. We don't want to do anything to threaten the PRC, but what we do want to do is we want to give a democratic nation the means it needs to protect and to defend itself to prevent aggression. That's good for Taiwan. It's good for democracy. It's good for human rights. It's good for the U.S. and its allies with all the semiconductors. And it's also good for people. Two, I think we should continue to do more public diplomacy and cultural exchanges. I think that's absolutely critical. On any given day, there's more than 5,000 Americans in Taiwan. If there is an attack and if Americans die, the Americans need to also be able to protect U.S. citizens and U.S. ally and strategic partner citizens. So those are my parting thoughts. Last but not least, we would prefer peace, and we also want to advocate for a strong PRC that helps promote the economy. We just don't want it to be aggressive.
Dr. Satoru, please.
Taiwan is independent country, already indeed. So that's why how to maintain the current situation is very important. But in this case, changing the military balance in this region is a big threat, of course, because last decade, China built 148 naval ships from 2030 to 2022 in this case, a little old, but then the view from this kind of process, increasing number of the defense product is a 4 years process. Winston Churchill said, first year just investment, nothing has happened, but second year little, third year many, and fourth year fraud. So that's why if China builds so many number currently, this means that this is the third year and the fourth year, China can build more in the future. So that's why we are afraid the situation, the military balance is changing. And if China believed they can win, it will happen. So we must protect them by increasing our military. That is the first thing, I think. But at the same time, because Taiwan is already independent country, that's why we try to include Taiwan in the international stage is very important, I think. For example, even if the observer, we should include Taiwan as an observer when we talk about COVID-19 crisis. So that is one of the examples. In the international stage, we should include Taiwan. This is maybe a soft power method to include Taiwan as an independent country. Because we see Taiwan already independent, no one doubts it. But China says it is part of them, so we can respect China's opinion as China's opinion. That's but our eyes or our knowledge is not indicate that Taiwan is already independent. So that's why we cannot change the real fact. So that's why maybe this kind of the soft power stance to include Taiwan to be maybe practical level of the independent country. That is very important, and we should do that, I believe. Thank you very much.
Dr. Satoru, that was a fantastic final remark, if I may say so. We have no time left. I'm terribly sorry. And we could continue for hours discussing this really strategic, important issue. I thank you very, very much for your contribution, for your presence, for your remarks, your views, and for this fantastic discussion. I appreciate that very much. and I enjoyed to be with you. Thank you again. I have no alternative but to close the session. I think we learned a lot. It's a strategic issue of global importance. We need to be very clear in our position. We need to support Taiwan for the benefit of all, and we need to make clear to Beijing that we have our views, and we have to be very clear upfront, as you said, John, as you said, Dr. Satoru. Thank you again, and I hope to see you soon again. And this ends the session. And have a wonderful day and a good time. And yes, let's strive for peace. Thank you very much.
It is
And
on-
goodbye.